Good evening. I'm Lee Walworth. On behalf of the Somerville Producers Group, I welcome you to Dead Air Live on February 19th, 91. 34 days we've been hearing about the bombing that's been going on in the Persian Gulf. We've heard it from Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings, and Dan Rather. But tonight we'd like to give you a fresh perspective on the war. What we decided is that we would like to hear from Somerville residents and how they felt about the war. So what we did was we advertised. We advertised that the first 25 people that came down to the studio tonight would be able to go on the air and give their perspective about the war. Now, we did that because we didn't know if there'd be too many people or there'd be too few. As it turned out, we had, I don't know if you can see, you'll see in a second behind me, 3 brave souls that came down here tonight to talk. So what they are going to do, tonight they're going to give their views on unlimited time, and then we're going to roll some tapes that we did some street interviews last weekend. So we have tonight with us Mike Quirk, Julie Kelleher, and Marita Wimmer. And first we're going to start off with Mike Quirk, and he's going to speak about his views on the war. Mike?
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate this opportunity to express my views on the war. What I find in recent days trying to form an opinion about this war is that the information available to me is so scarce and so distorted that it's very difficult for me to form a definite opinion. But I've formed enough of an opinion to want to express some of my views now. The rabid flag wavers cheering American troops on to kill and be killed in the deserts of the Mideast seem to possess a certitude about the causes and consequences of this war that I don't have. President Bush has given us different reasons for sending American troops to the Mideast. First, he told us they were being sent to defend Saudi Arabia. Next, he told us they were being sent to liberate Kuwait. And finally, he said they were being sent to overthrow the government of Iraq. How can I believe a person who keeps giving different reasons for the same act? Which reasons do the flag wavers believe? The President has not discussed the consequences, short-term or long-term, of the Mideast war. This indicates to me he has not thought about them. So far, among the short-term consequences is a tremendous oil spill into the Persian Gulf and some oil well fires, quite likely to be followed by hundreds more that are polluting the atmosphere. Why weren't these consequences anticipated? Even if the United States conquers Iraq and gains control of the Mideast oil fields, it will be confronted by hostile Muslims in Iraq and the remainder of the Mideast, as well as North Africa, much of South Asia, and even parts of Russia. Under such conditions, the United States is unlikely to be able to retain control of the oil fields or maintain stability in the area. Other wars in the region are likely to result. Have the super patriots considered these likely consequences? The United States media is encouraging mindless acceptance of ill-considered policies and helping to whip up the racial and ethnic hatreds expressed by thoughtless bullies waving the flag and tying yellow ribbons. The media is bringing out the hatred and ignorance in many of us. I find this chauvinism manipulated and unsavory. One American has no more intrinsic worth than one Arab. One Arab is equal to one American, no more, no less. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Spike. So as you can see from tonight's show, we really put it together as to what's going to happen by what happens from the audience out there. We didn't know how many people to anticipate tonight. But we're also going to let you people out there have a chance to participate because we're going to be going to the phones a little later on the show, a chance for you to call in. That we call this show Somerville Speaks, War and Peace on the Mideast. So while you're out there, think about some questions that you might have or just comments that you might want to make later in the show. We'll have the number flashed up on the screen for you. But that will come a little later after our speakers speak and we have our street interviews. But right now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and it's Julie Kelleher. Julie?
Thank you, Lee. I want to take this opportunity to first thank Somerville Community Access Television and Lee and his crew for giving us this opportunity to speak our mind. I am a secretary at Brigham and Women's Hospital. I am a lifelong resident of Somerville, and I am a flag waver, and I left my yellow ribbon at home, but I have my sweater. In a democracy such as ours, while not giving up our constitutional rights, we must accept the will of the majority. When the will of the majority is ignored, the rights of the minority become non-existent, since it was the will of the majority which brought forth our Constitution and the rights of the minority in the first place. The duly appointed representatives of the United Nations, which the United States joined freely, the duly elected President of the United States, elected not by voice or rank, but by constitutionally mandated elections, his duly appointed advisors, selected to their positions with the advice and consent of our legislator, the duly elected representatives of the people. These all have, after months of careful negotiations, painstaking diplomacy, and tireless gathering, analyzing, and disseminating of volumes of reports, diplomatic cables, and a myriad of other information, these people have chosen, within the framework of 12 United Nations resolutions, to drive an obdurate dictator from the defenseless country he ruthlessly invaded on August 2nd, 1990. Ours is not to undermine these efforts with the same tired mantras, the same infantile antics, and under the guise of support our troops, but not the war. Ours is to support our men and women fighting in the Gulf by supporting the efforts of their commander-in-chief to bring this conflict to a swift and decisive end, with minimum bloodshed on all sides and maximum guarantee that no other dictator will be able to roll his tanks into any country he chooses with impunity. You cannot say you support a soldier carrying an M16, but you do not support why he carries it or what it will be used for. You cannot decide to be supportive when it is convenient and turn your backs on them when the fighting starts. Do you support him when he carries his weapon unloaded, but your support ceases when he inserts his magazine? Or is he able to load and still merit your blessing, but such blessing becomes a curse when his finger wraps around the trigger? This rhetoric does not wash, and the majority of the people of this country see right through it. In the same vein, bombing federal facilities and municipal vehicles, blocking vital roadways, disrupting the flow of information, and destroying private and public property are not protected by the Constitution. These are criminal offenses and should be dealt with appropriately, swiftly, and thoroughly. They insist on playing the game, but they claim that since they did not make the rules, they comply with only those rules of their choosing and at their leisure. If they are on first base, they can steal second. But when they are pitching, you had better stay put. These are so-called rules the liberals live by. No one wants war, except the man who demonstrated his preference on August 2nd, 1990. We who are not anti-war cannot be classified as hawkish deathmongers, any more than those who say they want peace can be generalized as spineless, lazy anti-Americans, mindlessly chanting for an unconditional end to the war regardless of the consequences. We have seen the results of peace at any price in Vietnam. now one of the poorest countries on earth, a nation from which, even today, 1,500 refugees still flee monthly. We who support President Bush want peace, a just peace for the people of Kuwait and the Middle East, a peace safe from the threat of the likes of Saddam Hussein. And we recognize that the President and his advisors in the past 6 months have made the most difficult decisions anyone has had to make in over 40 years, and that they have not made these decisions lightly. The silent majority is silent no more. Our voices have been raised across the country in support of President Bush and his administration, a country made free by the endless effort of these men and women, and especially the brave men and women of Operation Desert Shield. We should support them all. We owe them that much.
Julie, thank you very much. We appreciate what you have to say, and I guess that's really what we wanted to do tonight. We want to give residents a chance to speak their minds. As you can see, we have differing points of view, and we wanted people just to listen to them and tolerate the other points of view. This was not meant to be a debate, but a chance for people just to talk and express themselves. Our last speaker, before we go to our on-the-street interviews, which I remind you, after the on-the-street interviews, we'll be having phone call-ins where we'll take comments and questions and also give you a chance at home to speak your mind about Somerville, what your views are about the war. So I believe the number is 628-8826. They'll probably be flashing that up on the screen at some point in time, but that will be there. But our last speaker is Marita Wimmer. And Marita, would you join me over here, please?
Well, thank you. My name is Marita Wimmer. And I want to mention something about the role of the military-industrial complex in this war. Thank you. Well, as you know, the war has meant good business for the military-industrial complex. And back in August of 1990, after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, a spokesperson for Kidder Peabody, which is owned by General Electric, said, quote, "If Iraq does not withdraw and things get messy, it will be good for the industry. You will hear less rhetoric from Washington about the peace dividend." Well, General Electric is the second largest defense contractor in the United States. And then I found this poster. This is a reduced copy of a poster GE has put in their production facilities. It says GE Power in the Persian Gulf, and it lists a number of weapon systems that are involved in the Persian Gulf, like the F-16, the F-14, F-117A, and so on. So, as a matter of fact, GE makes parts to almost every single weapon system that the US is using in the Persian Gulf, both conventional and nuclear-capable weapon systems. And GE is putting up these posters in the plants to actively promote the war among the workers. And also GE is lobbying for a high defense budget, basically for a Cold War defense budget. And they are lobbying for a federal budget in which 50% goes to the military, while only 2% go for housing and education and nutrition. And I want to mention that there is something people can do. INFACT, which is a national grassroots organization, is currently organizing a boycott of all GE products because of GE's involvement in the production and promotion of nuclear weapons in general. And if you would like to find out more about INFACT and the Nuclear Weapon Makers Campaign, you can call the New England Campaign Center of INFACT at 266-7173. So the number is the New England Campaign Center of INFACT at area code 617-266-7173. Thank you.
Marita, thank you very much. It really hits home to me on really what this country is about when I find people of different opposing views being able to come and speak them. And that's really what we wanted tonight, a chance for people to come and speak their minds. But right now, what we're going to do is go to some interviews that we took out on the street about a week ago, so we'll get a chance to see some more Somerville people speaking their minds about war and peace in the Middle East. Do you think that the United States went in too fast?
I think we did, yeah. I think personally we should have given sanctions more of a chance to work.
Well, I support President view about the war.
You support President Bush's view about the war? Do you think that he went in at the right time? Do you think it was too fast, too slow?
No, I think he went at the right time, sure. If we have certain principles that to get rid of this person who's an evil to that area, you know, it's fine, you know.
Talking about Saddam Hussein?
Saddam Hussein, sure, yeah.
Get rid of him?
Sure, yeah.
So what is your hope how things will be resolved?
I wish United States should get rid of him first, you know, and save a lot of thousands of lives and going into war, you know.
What are your thoughts about what's going on in the Mideast right now?
Well, I have mixed feelings, just sort of like the Congress. The fact that there was such controversy about what to do back, middle of January, I sort of like that as well. I sort of side with the Democrats. There was some room for patience, both in military as well as diplomacy as well. I hope that this can be resolved quickly without too many casualties, of course, but I have very mixed feelings at present.
Do you think the United States acted too quickly?
Yes, exactly. Actually, I'm reading Thomas Friedman's book, From Beirut to Jerusalem, right now, and I suppose that captures my feelings about the origins of the problem there as well as how to solve it. The U.S. typically comes in like a big elephant, not understanding the problem, and tries to use superior force. It will work this time, but lives and the casualties will be probably too high.
Feelings about how it affects us here?
I have cousins. I also have very close friends who are in the Middle East right now. So it'll affect me directly. As far as broadly as a society, I feel that I can't travel right now. That's the other direct thing. I mean, there's a lot of geopolitical long-term effects, which we can't really discuss that well in this context. But peace is a very difficult thing to achieve, and clearly this is one in a series of events that are going to constantly rock the Middle East as long as we don't try to achieve some consolidated peace with all of these countries, not just Iraq, but also the Jordan-Palestinian problem.
It's useless. This is not a war that we used to have before. This is something that they were wondering about the nuclear war, bombs and this and that, how far it would go in time. This was not a war. This was a time thing to see those things. And in the meantime, who suffered? I saw a little baby with a bonnet on. Please don't tell me. Yes, what's going to happen with the ground war now? There'll be a bloody battle. And for what? It's useless. Why don't they just go in there and get him? That's all.
Get him.
Get him, yes.
They got Saddam.
Oh, yes. There's too much bloodshed. Children are suffering. And for what? It's a useless war.
I thought that the sanctions weren't working, or weren't working quick enough, so I did support the movement of troops or the air raids on Iraq and Kuwait at that time.
At the right time.
Yeah, I think so.
Do you know anyone personally in the Gulf? How do you think, are you affected here in the United States by what's going on?
I do know a couple people over in the Gulf. I'm concerned about their well-being. I just hope that nothing happens to them, but I don't know what else to say. I mean, I hope they come home quickly, and I hope they do what they need to do.
What do you think about this war?
Tell you the truth, we talked about it in school a few times, but I just came up with the same old answers. It's stupid. Sending all those people out there just fight and die over just like oil. I know we need it, but I mean, I don't think we needed enough to have people die and their families wishing that they're coming home, knowing that it's like a 90 to 10 chance that they won't come home. There's still people, either way you put it, even though if they're from this part of the world or this part, I just can't say.
What exactly do you mean?
I just mean, like, I just hope they just break off, forget about the whole thing, you know, work something out. Because they don't need people dying out there, and we don't need people dying out here.
Well, we need the money for other things. But I work in a preschool center, and we're being cut back drastically, overwhelmingly, overnight. And more children are being cut off the rolls because of the war. Because there's no funding going to Office for Children and other kind of vouchers and things. And I think the war just accumulates this kind of nationalistic attitude, but avoids the problems that we have right here. This war is totally outrageous, and who does it support? It supports a small group of elite people in Kuwait, you know, that it's an aristocracy, and we're supposed to be a democracy supporting an aristocracy. I mean, there's so many contradictions to this whole thing. I'm totally opposed to every aspect of this.
You think there's going to be more anti-Arab and anti-Middle East racism?
Oh, there's no question about it, you know. I mean, it's kind of funny. People want to be over there to defend Kuwait, but they want to go after, you know, that they feel uncomfortable around Arab people. They think that they're all terrorists or, you know, doing terrorist actions or planning some subversive, conspiratorial plot, you know.
No, I think it's crazy.
Yeah?
I think it's crazy, and I'm really scared. Like I'm living here. I have a lot of friends, American friends, and they feel like I hurt inside of me. I don't like discrimination later, because the next generation, I don't know what's going to happen to them. And that's what scared me about the war.
What do you think about people in the United States, the anti-war activists, the people that are protesting the war?
God bless them. Why should they stay down? How can they stay down?
We're back on the air in the studio. I'm here with Mike, Julie, and Marita, who I really appreciate them being here tonight. I know what it's like to sit up here in front of the lights and speak, so I commend them very much. But for you people out there, we'd like you to know that the phone lines are now open, and they should be flashing the number up on the screen, that we'd like you to join us, and comment, if you would, on the tapes that you just saw, or what are your views on the war, that this show was about Somerville and the residents and giving them a chance to speak their mind on the war. But while we wait and see if we get any response, maybe I could ask the people up here, when you thought, when the war first started, did you think that sanctions had enough time to go on, or was it too soon, or did somebody want to jump in? Or
I thought it was too soon. I thought that sanctions were having an effect, and I read some analysis to the effect that sanctions were working, and that given some time more, they would have worked further, although actually defining what working meant is something that not many political pundits or anybody else has done yet. I assume that the more people in Kuwait suffered, the more readily they would be willing to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And I thought they were suffering. I think given another year or so, like most former secretaries of state testified, they thought sanctions would work. Given another year or so, we wouldn't have to be faced with this calamity of killing more Arabs and losing more American lives. So I thought they weren't given sufficient opportunity to be effective.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Mike.
I've always been under the impression, first of all, that sanctions were more of a long-term solution. Sanctions are something that you impose on a country such as South Africa to get them to see the errors of their way over a long period of time. From what I understand, sanctions I think sanctions were a good strategy, but I think they were a good part of the overall strategy because, because of sanctions, Saddam Hussein doesn't have time to re-outfit his people because even though there are little parts coming through the Jordanian border and other borders, the basic war materiel that he needs for his aircraft.
Do you think they were given long enough to work? Or you agree with President Bush that he went into the war at the time that he did?
I agree with him that he went. I agree with the president when he went in, simply because I don't think with all the loopholes and with all the sieves that sanctions would have ever worked.
Mm-hmm.
I think they would have been. I think as an overall part of the strategy, they're very effective. But I don't think in and of themselves they would have ever worked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think that any correspondence and negotiation was basically reduced to ultimatums, right? And so I'm not sure of how well the sanctions would have worked or not worked. What I see is that when I think back to getting to the United States to impose sanctions on South Africa, it took a very long time to impose limited sanctions. And here there was like a full-scale sanction being opposed within a couple days, which was, it was a real surprise. Unfortunately, the sanctions also reached out to healthcare and to medicine people needed in the region. I think in both Iraq and Kuwait, there is an infection going around which mainly affects children, and thousands of children are dying there, and the World Health Organization did not provide those countries with the medicine they needed.
Julie, looks like you might want to respond to that.
Well,
and my understanding was that this was part of the sanction.
Yeah. Well, on two things. First, the reasons that the sanctions were brought together so quickly was because people, the United Nations realized that this was a very despicable act and it had to be dealt with quickly. As far as the sanctions applying to certain products, from what my understanding of the United Nations resolutions, and I haven't read them verbatim, but from what I understand, medical and humanitarian supplies were to be allowed to go through. They were excluded from the sanctions. The only thing that the sanctions were against is stuff like war material and building material and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, I'd be willing to wager that it specifically says this medical supplies were exempt from the sanctions.
But I guess for me to understand, Marita, do you think that they were?
I'm not sure. My understanding was that this was included, and my understanding was that reading in the paper that the World Health Organization was hesitant to send Iraq the medical supply that it needs.
Does that mean, do you think the sanctions, they should have gone in when Bush went in or not? Do you think they should have waited longer before the war started?
Well, if I'm right on what I have gathered on information, then I think that the sanctions should have been more limited and carefully considered. And I mean, sure, any peaceful negotiation.
And then given a longer chance to work themselves out. Okay, that I can understand. Just to remind you again, the phone lines are open. The phone line should be flashing on your screen from time to time. You can call in and let us know what your thoughts are about the war. Another question I have, how has the war affected each of you here at home? In what way?
I feel, basically, I've been inundated with propaganda from the moment the firing began. That I was so appalled by the amount of propaganda emitted from the American media, a failure of concrete information and analysis as to not only what our goals were, but the methods we were going to use and the cost involved in this, that I went out and bought a shortwave radio to get some other country to explain to me what the hell is going on over there. And I did get certain facts from other countries broadcast in English that I wasn't getting from the American media. So I felt relieved somewhat to feel that there were not completely non-biased, but at least other sources of information outside this country.
Can I ask where do you get, like what country can you pick up information from?
I get the BBC, I get Quito in Ecuador, which has an English language broadcast. Radio Havana, I can get certain other areas that broadcast in English that have a different point of view in regard to this Mideast situation than the parties involved. So my basic feeling about this is I was so repelled by what I saw, the paucity of information, the concrete analysis of what was going on, that I turned away from the American media entirely and sought another source of information.
Okay, good. You know what? You're being real flexible tonight, and I really appreciate that, because we're going to try and go to a phone call. And so we're going to be interspersed between going back and forth. And let's try this out. Hello.
Hi.
Hello, you're on the air.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to commend you all for doing a program like this, that you can have the true freedom of speech that we have in this country, to have people be able to come on and share their views no matter what they are. And I guess I wanted to respond to the last question you asked about how this is affecting us now, or how affecting people now. And I think several things hit me. One is that I think we're getting the media coverage that we're getting. I too, like the gentleman Mr. Quirk said, is looking for other alternative news on it, like BBC. I've been following BBC's coverage because I feel like it's much more, there's something more global about it. But also I get really scared because it really looks like a video war. It looks like we're sort of reenacting the video games of the 80s. And what we see are these very precise, sterile targets. And we're not seeing the devastation that has to be happening over there. The other thing that makes it really hard for me as a parent is trying to explain to a 4-year-old child why this war is there, where I'm teaching him to use his words and learn how to resolve conflict in his life. And it's very frightening that basically I've told him that the war is because there's grown-ups who have learned not to use their words. So it's really been hard. I feel like there's sort of a real depression that sort of sets in and sort of creeps into your life. And it's really hard. And I think, again, the sanctions weren't given enough time. And I can't think of any reason that people should die for. So anyway, I'm really glad you're doing the show, and just thought I'd call in and speak my mind.
Well, thank you very much for calling. Appreciate that.
You know, I think too about talking to kids and trying to explain a situation like this would be very difficult for me, except to say adults at times they go insane, and their hatred simmers up so much that they pick any convenient outlet, and no matter what kind of reasons they've been given for their hate, it doesn't matter. They just want to express it. And now we're doing it in this country, and we've picked a scapegoat, and it gives a social sanction to hatred.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we could pick back up on the last question of how has the war affected you both here at home?
Well, I want to pick up on a couple of things that Mike spoke of. First thing, I also have a shortwave radio, and in a global, environment such as ours, I think that's one of the best investments. I'd urge everyone to get a shortwave radio. I have also listened to the BBC. Is there
a good brand you should buy or something?
I don't know. I'm not gonna advertise any particular brand. The second thing he mentioned, and I want to also comment on the information that has been, put forth by the Bush administration. I don't know if anyone out there could tell me any of the spokespeople of, previous administrations. But I know there are more than a few people out there who have watched C-SPAN and who know, for instance, people like Margaret Tutwiler and Pete Williams. Margaret Tutwiler's at the State Department, Pete Williams at the Pentagon, and Mountain Fitzwater at the White House, because these people have been out there in the front, putting out this information for us. And the beauty of it is, when you see a State Department briefing and you see the newspaper the next day and it says something like, State Department spokeswoman Margaret Tutwiler said this and this and this, and I'll say, oh no, wait a minute, she didn't say that. I saw that on C-SPAN. This is what she says. So the beauty of, these people whose sole purpose, the sole purpose of the spokespeople is to get this information out to us. And that's also the beauty of cable television, and you have, networks like C-SPAN, which many people only watch when they're lying flat on their back recovering from the flu, but it's a very important station, and I will give that a plug too. I also urge, people to watch that. I think the information for me has almost been too much, because you do get so much of it, and I think it's up to us, to analyze, what's happening, and if we do have a problem with it, to not just, sit in our chairs and stew, but to either come into a forum like this, or get down with a pen and paper and write to President Bush or Secretary Baker or General Powell or wherever and say, hey, I like what you're doing, or I don't like what you're doing.
Did you want to make a comment, Marita?
Yes, I do. Well, I think about that the U.S. is spending $800 million or $1 billion a day for this war now. And there is such a poverty in the United States. There are somewhat like 3 million people homeless, somewhat like 10 million children live in poverty. And I'm very angry that the money is being wasted for a war for the rich, and people in this country go without decent health care, without food, without shelter. And yeah, it makes me very angry. The other part is that coming from Germany, I can see that people here have never experienced a war. I myself have never experienced a war. But I remember the stories of my grandmother and my mother, who spent many, many days of her childhood in a shelter, in a bomb shelter, or in a basement. People here don't have this kind of experience. And so what really struck me is also of how the U.S. is fighting a war. Well, where is the U.S.? It's across the ocean. Usually if you fight, you're directly engaged in the fight. There is no direct engagement. It's like, as the person said on the phone, it's like another video game. So I'm just wondering what evolves in people's brains and in people's minds.
Well, I agree with much of what you said. My feeling is that we get such a biased view of the world from this country that we're totally out of line with the thinking of 95% of the world's population. For example, if we're bombing hydroelectric stations in Baghdad, I think that they have the perfect right to bomb the Somerville hydroelectric station in Somerville, since we're at war with them. Or, since we're depriving them of water, they could bomb the Quabbin Reservoir from which we get our water.
It wouldn't make any difference with the water anyway.
Why?
The quality
Quabbin Reservoir. I wish they would bomb
Nevertheless, we have a way of looking at things that makes it seem that it's all right with whatever the United States does, but when it's a reciprocal act towards the United States, then it's very taboo. And then we wonder why the United States is hated throughout much of the world. And it's for that sort of intellectual imperialism, thinking that whatever the United States decides to do is fine. But as far as other countries reciprocating, in turn, that's taboo. So we invent morality plays to explain a very complex phenomena like this Mideast war. He's evil, we're good. Therefore, the good destroy the evil. Yeah, it's very simple to look at things like that, but I think it's totally erroneous. And you're right, we need more information, but we don't need the sort of information that has this for parameters. We need information like this from all corners of the world, from all diverse opinions, and not just the State Department. So unless we start getting information like that, I don't think we deserve to have an opinion about this war, because our opinions are uninformed ones.
Julie looks like she wants to speak.
No, I always get a kick out of people saying how much Americans are hated, but when it comes to borrowing money from our banks or getting loans from our government, the hatred just kind of seems to evaporate temporarily. And as far as reciprocating is concerned, I'd like to know what the Kuwaitis did to warrant the reciprocation that Saddam Hussein gave them. You know, that's something that has never been explained to me, is why Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. I mean, I've gotten a, and of course we haven't gotten anything out of them, because they have, because their press and information is more controlled.
No.
We've seemed to lost sight of the fact that, while, and it is a tragedy, and I feel the same way as you do as far as, you know, the loss of innocent life, but it seems that all the pictures we see from our media, and I have to agree with you, the media has been giving us a sanitized version, because they've been giving us what's been happening in Iraq. No American cameras have even been allowed into Kuwait to view the rapacious destruction that has been going on in Kuwait. Kuwait seems to have disappeared altogether, and now it's all Iraq, Iraq, Iraq. Well, what's happening in Iraq, I guarantee you, is happening 10 times worse in Kuwait.
How do you know if we get no information about Kuwait? How do you know what's
It's
going on
gonna be
there?
bad.
How
It's
do
gonna
you
be
know?
bad if we don't get
You
anything.
just said that there's no cameras allowed in Kuwait, no coverage there, so
Why
how
aren't
do
they
you know what's
allowed?
going on?
Why aren't they allowed?
I'm not sure.
I
I'm not
guarantee
about
you,
to defend Saddam Hussein.
I certainly
But
hope
when
not.
you say that you know what's going on in Kuwait, I think you're going beyond what anybody really knows.
Well, I have to form my own opinion based on what I see, and a lot of my opinion is also based on what I don't see. And when I see the destruction that we are allowed to see in Iraq, and I can you know, deduce that the destruction that we are not allowed to see in Kuwait it just has to be infinitely greater.
I've seen Baghdad reduced to rubble, but that's about all I've seen of Iraq. And
Well-
Baghdad has 4 million people, but it's a small part of Iraq. So I don't know what's going on in most of Iraq. And that's because we're getting censored reporting out of Iraq.
Well, we-
Military intelligence is deciding what we should form our opinions on in regard to this war. That's doing us an injustice and a disservice.
Well, at least Baghdad has rubble. I think the Iraqi soldiers have taken everything that hasn't been tied down in Kuwait. I can only imagine that Kuwait is just, you know, if you see a stretch of desert, that's what Kuwait used to be.
Yeah, I want to react to the points you make, and what's special about this war is that people don't die. Which is, I don't know of any war where people don't die. And it's known that the US is bombing populated areas in the different words they're using of carpet bombing and whatever the different words are. And that leads actually to another point I want to make, you know, about the power of language in this war, which is certainly used. I have heard the word surgical strike very often in the past weeks. So surgical strike, does that mean really only military facilities are being bombed? And I mean, like, what belongs to like the military facilities? It's like train stations, for example, right? Are there not any civilians at train stations?
Well, I don't know what news you're seeing, but from what the Iraqis have allowed us to see, I mean, in that alleged civilian shelters, I saw, you know, rows and rows of bodies of supposed civilians. So, you know, we are seeing bodies. The difference between the way the Allied coalition is fighting the war and the way the Iraqis are fighting the war is that when civilians die as a result of Allied fire, it's a news story because it's such a rare occurrence, and it isn't something that's being perpetuated purposely. Whereas when Saddam Hussein sends off a Scud missile to Israel, he doesn't care where it's going to land. He's just saying, hey, you know, fire this in the general direction of Tel Aviv. If we hit a hotel, we'll hit a hotel. You know, what's the difference? I mean, civilian casualties by Allied forces are the exception as far as Saddam Hussein is concerned. They're the rule.
I beg to differ. I think most of the casualties inflicted on the Arabs so far have been of civilians. It doesn't appear to me, although this is scanty reporting again, that we've killed too many Arab soldiers. But as you mentioned, that bomb shelter, there were a number of civilians killed. I've heard, you know, different reports of thousands of Iraqi civilians have died. I would guess at this point there's more civilians been killed in this war than military personnel on the Iraqi side.
Yeah. I've heard estimates of civilian deaths in Iraq between 2,000 and 60,000. So, and I'm going to agree with you 100% on one point. The information we're getting could be better, especially as far as the war itself is concerned. I myself, as I mentioned before, I'd like to see more of what's happening in Kuwait, because, like I said, I can only imagine. And Marita, thank you, mentioned something earlier that I'd like to press on, and we have been blessed in this country because we have not actually had to fight a war on American soil since the Civil War, and I, for one, am very grateful for that. But I know that people like Helmut Kohl and the President of France and Margaret Thatcher and John Major have all had wars fought on their soil, and they all are supporting the coalition in this. So
thank God they're all being tossed out of office.
Well, John Major's still in there.
Yeah.
Helmut Kohl is still in there, and I believe
heard
the president.
his position is very shaky.
I heard the
don't
president
know.
of France, as far as I know, hasn't changed in the past 6 months. So, and John Major was handpicked by Margaret Thatcher, by the way. So he's just that was just here, John. It's yours. Thank you, Maggie.
Which has to do with the government's political and economic interests, right? It doesn't have to do with the people directly. And yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think, and you mentioned another point. You know, there are industries that create weapons of war, and during wartime they are going to make a profit. These are necessary evils. War is a necessary evil, and I think what we do have to be grateful for is that people such as, you know, the, General Electric and Raytheon have built this machinery that is so accurate that they can. Someone said that they can launch a cruise missile out of San Diego and put it through the goalposts in Soldiers Field in Chicago. So we do have this accurate stuff, and you know, albeit it is, you know, they are weapons of war, and war is not good. It's never good, you know. So it's sometimes necessary. It's never good. But you know, I think we can be grateful at least that we have these accurate weapons and not these Scud missiles that you just shoot up, and you know, where it lands no one knows.
Mm-hmm. I want to shift for one second on what you think about the anti-war protesters in the United States. What are your thoughts?
My feeling is it's healthy. I'm glad that they're out there because I see very little dissent fed back to us in the media, and yet I know from seeing just some of the people who were interviewed in that subway in Davis Square that there's a lot of people feel uncomfortable about this. Basically, decent people are asked to support indecent acts, and I don't think anybody likes to support people who are killing other people. So while the dissent in the newspaper is very narrow or on TV, it's much broader out there, and I've seen it and participated in it on the Common. Believe me, I felt like I'd taken a shower after I marched with those people through downtown Boston and vocalized some of my feelings about what's going on in the Mideast. And I looked at those people on the sidewalk and I said, it's too bad, none of them will never know this feeling, that it's good that I can march down this street and vocalize this, and I think they would feel better if they could too.
Well, I think that, for one thing, when you have any kind of a crowd, the media has to justify the thousands and thousands of dollars worth of camera work. So what happens is that they usually overestimate the crowd, and they usually overestimate any crowd. I'm not going to say people don't have a right to protest, because everyone has a right to protest. They don't have a right to block Storrow Drive, and they don't have a right to block access to the JFK building and Government Center. But they do have a right to protest. I don't think they really have cause to. I mean, these are their elected representatives. Congress debated this question. They could have debated it longer, but they did debate it. And these representatives of the people, you know, voted to allow President Bush to exercise his duty under the United Nations resolutions. And then they turned around, and of course half of them did them just to cover their backs, and they unanimously supported President Bush's decision to use force. So,
Do you
like
think the protests are having an effect on, the soldiers' morale or the?
No, I think the soldiers are too smart to fall for that. I think they understand that most of the people in this country do support them and do support their commander-in-chief. The American service person, I'm not going to say they're smarter than they were 20 years ago. I think they're better informed as far as, I think they know the difference. I think when they see a crowd, they can say, well, this is 1,000 people out of how many millions and millions of Americans.
Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah,
Maria?
I think the slogan "Bring the troops home" is not in contradiction with supporting the troops. Yeah, I mean it's very well as support for the troops if the demand is to bring them home. And I think, well, in the anti-war movement, there's also a great opportunity now. For the anti-war movement, there are many issues being brought together of energy policies, nuclear weapons, environmental issues, and so on. So I think that there is some good opportunity, and also in other countries there is a very high anti-war sentiment. For example, in Germany, right, the day after the war started, 300,000 people were on the streets. So it does not mean that everyone just goes with what the economic elite of this country or other countries wants. Another point to comment is on, talking about elected representatives. Well, only 50% of the people vote in the United States.
Well, that's their problem. They had the opportunity to vote. That's, it's like you say, well, these people were only elected by 50% of the people, but everybody has a right to go in there and register to vote.
But they only have two parties. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not represented by either party in government.
You
And
get enough signatures, you can get on the
There's
ballot.
nobody that I can look at in the Massachusetts delegation or any other and say they are representing me. Because I feel I'm unrepresented due to the nature of the two-party system in this country. We need more than two parties. We need parties that will represent the mass of people rather than the small minority of people. So I don't feel their votes represent me at all.
I'm trying to think how that ties in with, the war. Or do you think that if you were represented, things could change? Or?
Yes, I think, for example, if this country had a Labor Party that represents the interests of the workers, that many of those people would have voted against this war because they would see that most of the people in the Mideast, no matter which country, they're workers too, and that the countries in the Mideast are mostly undemocratic, totalitarian. Their governments represent a small minority. So a Labor Party in this country, I think, could have forged ties with Labor parties in Mideast countries as well as other countries and represent the workers of this country and throughout the world. So I feel that if there was a third party, particularly a Labor Party, we might not be in this war now.
I agree with you. And as a matter of fact, in the last election, I voted on the ballot question that I voted for the ballot question that would open up. There was a conservative candidate who ran in New York. Herb London ran for mayor in New York, and I thought that was rather nifty. I'd like to see a conservative party in the country because I personally I think the Republican Party has moved so far away from, its conservative roots that it's, somebody said that the Democratic Party is now the Socialist Party, and the Republican Party is now the Democratic Party, and we really don't have any, Republican Party.
I would disagree. I would think the Democratic Party is not a Republican Party. Republican Party is not a reactionary party. That's been the swing in the last 30 years in this country, to the right.
I also think that we should not underestimate of how much our forces, how much influence over government decisions and government policies our forces have, like the military-industrial complex, like company officials. And I mean, they use mechanisms like the revolving door, PAC spending, lobbying to set national priorities and to shape national security policies in
Yeah.
this country, and they have a great deal of influence.
Well, I think there is a lot of influence, I think the biggest influence in this country as far as PACs and lobbying are the labor unions. I mean, they are such an incredible, powerful force in this country, especially considering how little of a percentage of the population they actually
You know, we're starting to
represent.
wind down to run out of time towards the end of the show. But I thought that we began the show with you each got a chance to say your piece. And that's what the show was all about, was a chance for you just to come up and say what you want. We think about the news and you see little bites of news here and there, and no one gets a chance to finish their thought. So what we really wanted was a chance for you to come up and say what you had to say and finish your thoughts. So I'm going to give you each a last chance to sum up if you'd like, and we're going to be close to be out of time at that point. So,
Great.
Mike, why don't you start?
Great. I think this is one of the most encouraging sort of recent phenomena in this country, the development of cable access TV. And this is a basis for getting opinions out in the media to members of the community that otherwise would be stifled. Basically, my objections to this war is that it has been personalized. Saddam Hussein is the cause. It has been moralized. He is evil. It has been dehumanized. Therefore, we need to destroy him and all will be right with the world. This is simplistic. It's not true. And basing your opinions on the war about that guarantees that your opinion will be ill-informed. And if it happens to be the right one, whichever that is, it's strictly by accident. So the level of propaganda about this, I object to strongly.
We're going to have to give me 10, 15 seconds.
I saw it in Vietnam from this city where I've spent my life. I'm seeing it again. There's too much propaganda about that. We need intelligent, serious analysis of what's going on there.
Thank you, Mike. Julie?
Oh, thank you. Again, I agree with Mike. This forum is wonderful. I'm quite pleased to be here, and I'm pleased to be able to talk with everybody. I have to reiterate, I think that cable is one of the best things to happen to this country since the soapbox, and I think the variety of information, some people may think it's a little limited, but the variety of information that we have out there is such a refreshing change from the likes of Tom Brokaw and Peter Jennings and Dan Rather, please.
Okay, we're going to have to go a little speedy because we only have a minute left. Can you 10 seconds to finish?
Sure. Just if you like this show and you think cable is as important as I do, come to the meeting tomorrow night at 7:30 at City Hall and tell people how you feel.
Beautiful. She doesn't work here either. Marita, go ahead.
Well, I want this war to stop now, to bring the troops home, and to use those precious resources for basic human needs in the United States and elsewhere.
Well, thank you. Well, you know, this show didn't really turn out the way that we thought and planned. We thought we were going to get a lot of people down here and they'd be up speaking. But right now I feel really good about that everybody got a chance to speak their minds and finish their thoughts. And I agree with Julie that tomorrow night there's a meeting up at City Hall at 7:30, and be there because it's the time that cable, we knew our contract, and I'm trying to hurry. We have to leave. Thank you very much for watching, and I really thank you people for being here and being such a big part of the show. Thank you and good night.
Thanks, Lee.
No, thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.